Hey people YouTube, Mishka Valhalla here. Today we are going to talk about the Norse parts of the self, which are known as the Likr, the physical body, and the Fylgjur, one's ancestral guardian, per se. And the Fylgjur, which we are going to start with, is sort of a spiritual tie to your ancestral line. Sort of how the Fylgjur, like the Fylgja, which is the animal version of oneself, the more animalistic side of oneself, one could say the Fylgjur could be the more humanistic version of oneself. Sort of, one's tied to their human ancestors, less so than some sort of animal totem, but we can of course get into that later on. But the Fylgjur, focusing on the Fylgjur alone, could be an ancestral figure that essentially is not only the guardian of an individual, but also has the appearance, carries on the appearance, somebody in the family line carries on the appearance of their Fylgjur, which is one of their ancestors. And that's why some people inherit certain traits from their ancestors, because they have a particular ancestor that is watching over them and that has passed on many of their traits. But of course this could also be interpreted as some sort of reincarnation, maybe. When we are talking about the Fylgjur, that could just be a spirit that is close to an individual, an ancestral spirit that is close to an individual that essentially cannot leave, because they are tied to that individual, but they are essentially a separate being. But when we are talking from an animistic and shamanistic point of view, these two consciousnesses could essentially be the same. So if somebody were to reincarnate, and essentially be a distant family member of theirs or an ancestor of theirs, they could essentially be the same individual that ancestor was. But it heavily depends. It definitely depends on the spiritual path and of course the individual who is perceiving their Fylgjur. Their Fylgjur could be a literal ancestral spirit that watches over them, or they could literally be the incarnation of that family member. So it was believed, and it's at least written in the sagas, where there were instances where somebody would essentially be one of their ancestors. But of course, perhaps the Fylgjur could be, not an ancestor, and could be perhaps just a simple guardian spirit that at birth, much like the typical understanding of the Fylgjur, is tied to that individual, so they are assigned to watch over that individual throughout their life. You could also, of course, going back into the Fylgja, which is the animal spirit, could be a reflection of oneself, meaning it could be the person, who is that animal, but it could also be a separate companion, like a familiar. But of course, as some of you may know, a familiar can be a separate, physical animal that essentially assists a shaman or a spiritual practitioner in their workings. But the Fylgjur, being, more of an ancestral figure, that is essentially, as a human, that individual, the Fylgjur, is essentially who you end up looking like. You end up looking like essentially the ancestor that passed on their most traits. So essentially you have a whole bunch of different spirits at play when it comes to the self. And it doesn't mean these spirits are individual entities. They could in fact be individuals, but they could also be essentially just extensions of an individual, meaning the both of you are essentially manifestations of the same consciousness. Anyway, moving on to the Likr, which of course is one's physical manifestation, someone's body or corpse. That's essentially what Likr can also translate to, is a physical corpse. And those are the same corpses that are referred to as the corpses that essentially flow down the river Fylgjur, and of course go to Nidhogg, who devours the corpses of the dead. So essentially frees the spirits from their mortal bonds. But when we were talking about the Likr alone, as the body, the Likr is, your physical body, but essentially it is all your physical limitations as well. The Likr is also your physical strengths. So obviously when you build muscle, you are building your Likr. And so essentially, that can be compared to your Fylgjur, because your Fylgjur is essentially, something that you passed on. So you could end up looking like one of these ancestors, but then again, you could also just inherit their traits, meaning you could end up not looking like them, but you inherited their traits. So essentially it's the same thing, but of course, it being something various in variety, literally, because each individual is unique, just like each plant is unique, each fish is unique. The world is unique on so many levels, and there are so many details that should not be left out. And so when it comes to analyzing these different Norse parts of the self, it sort of kind of brings us closer to the animistic understanding. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can stay tuned for future videos. Also, please follow my TikTok if you really like my content. I upload on there more frequently. It is a more convenient app to use when it comes to sharing Norse related content. So thank you so much for watching, and please stay safe, everybody, and hail the gods and the spirits, and just look out for each other, people. All right, thank you.